What if the superhero team that built the foundation of an entire universe finally reached the point where none of them could hold it together anymore? Hey everyone, welcome back to Panelix. Glad to have you here because today we're diving into one of the most dramatic futures ever written in the Marvel Universe. A story that shows what happens when time, tragedy, and legacy all come crashing down on the first family of superheroes. The comic we're exploring is Fantastic Four: The End, a standalone future timeline story from Marvel that reimagines where Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben ultimately end up. What makes it interesting is how it contrasts with other Fantastic Four storylines. Instead of cosmic adventures and big team heroism, this one asks, what happens when the bonds that kept this family together finally break? It's connected thematically to many alternate future stories in Marvel, but this one cuts deeper because of how personal and emotional it gets. And trust me, the way each member's life spirals into their own version of the end is something you won't see coming. All right, let's move straight into the storyline, starting from the moment everything in their family begins to fall apart. At that moment, Doom and the Fantastic Four were seen fighting. Doom had 4 cyborg hands, one of which was blocking Human Torch's attack, while another knocked Ben down. The third hit the Invisible Woman, and the fourth slammed Reed's head into a box. Reed Richards explained that Doom had suffered terrible injuries after the Mutant War, and it took him years to repair himself, so that he now looked more like a machine than a human being, and he could only survive because of his desire to dominate the Earth. After that, Doom realized that the world had changed, that his technological superiority and political status were gone, and he went mad. Doom still uses his 4 robotic arms to face the Fantastic Four, who are seen floating in space in a large aircraft. Doom says they think they are safe here, but he will not let them go. Reed extends his arm and punches Victor in the face, saying Victor doesn't need to do this because he can be part of this future. But Victor replies that this is Reed's own future. Doom insists that they used to be great. They were gods, their minds and genius gave them the right to rule the world. But Reed has given that up. Doom then hits Reed and adds that Reed has sacrificed all of that to pursue his childish utopian fantasy. Ben argued that the war was over, so why didn't he do as Sez's song said and give peace a chance? Ben then punched Doom in the face, but Doom said Ben was stupid. Doom knocked Ben down with his cyborg hand that emitted green rays, saying that what did they think? That there would be peace if they eliminated human hunger and disease with technological freedom. According to Doom, life is conflict, where the strong grow amid differences, and that is why Doom tolerates their existence. Doom then swung his hand, which contained purple energy, causing Susan and Johnny to fall. Doom then hit Reed with his white energy-filled hand, saying that Reed was a stone that helped sharpen his mind. He then prepared his other hand, which contained green energy, adding that he had underestimated how big of a problem Reed's sentimentality could cause, but he would fix it now. At that moment, a large demonic figure shouted at Doom to release his father. Reed was separated from Doom's grip due to Franklin's illusory intervention, and a huge explosion threw Doom away. Franklin appeared before Doom with Valeria, telling Doom to give up because he would not win. While Susan, seeing this, told Franklin and Valeria to stay away, but they ignored her. Doom said that Franklin was strong but had no strategy. Doom's tentacle-like limbs wrapped around Valeria's body and pulled her towards him. He said that Franklin's illusion was a gift from a little witch, but was tainted by his parents' weakness. Valeria, who is in Doom's hands, says she is not afraid of Doom, and seeing this, Franklin advances towards Doom and tells him to release Valeria, while Reed yells at Franklin to lower his power, and Susan begs Doom, saying that they are just children. Franklin continues to advance against Doom even though Reed tells him to lower his power, but then there is a blinding explosion. Reed's voice explains that a chain reaction occurred when the energy released by Doom and Franklin collided. And once the reaction started, it could not be stopped, and there was nothing they could do. Reed, who is now old with gray hair, is seen recounting the incident. while She-Hulk, who is listening to Reed's story while holding a writing device, forbids Reed from continuing his story. Reed says he has to continue because Jennifer is here as his therapist, and the fact that he created the Methuselah treatment does not exempt him from the observation protocol. They then walk toward a circle of debris left behind from Doom and Franklin's previous battle, while Reed said that Franklin and Valeria's deaths were the saddest moments for him. He spent years thinking about what he should have done differently, thinking that Doom was right, that he had sacrificed everything for a dream of utopia. It turned out that at the end of where they were, there was a glass window showing that they were in outer space, and that outside the Fantastic Four's aircraft were other spacecraft. According to She-Hulk, this was not a dream, but a reality of utopia. Reed had brought humanity out of darkness after the Mutant War, and Reed's technology allowed humans to survive and thrive beyond their wildest dreams. Reed argued that the awards and medals he had received confirmed this. According to She-Hulk, Doom was a psychopath who was jealous of Reed's success, and it was Doom's actions that had caused the deaths of Reed's children, not Reed's responsibility. Hearing this, Reed says Jennifer sounds more like a lawyer than a therapist, while Jennifer feels that this is her old habit, especially since she used to be the best lawyer, until the new life created by Reed rendered the old judicial system obsolete. They then walk away from the place while Jennifer says she is Reed's friend and she will not lie to him. Reed replied that if he wanted Jennifer to give him her diagnosis and hoped it was the truth, she didn't need to pull any punches or soften her words. However, according to Jennifer, that wasn't something that should be said to She-Hulk, and Reed agreed. Jennifer then said that Reed was a protective professor who was focused on his work and, over time, had become closed off and obsessive. Reed didn't even notice that Sue had her own life now, or that their time apart had become more frequent and longer. Reed and Jennifer were seen walking across a bridge where Reed's robots were repairing parts of the aircraft. Jennifer continues that one of the consequences of the Methuselah treatment is that long life reduces their vigilance because people say there are too many tomorrows. Reed has avoided moving on after the death of his children by immersing himself in work and at the same time distancing himself from his friends and wife. Here, Reed looks surprised and asks, "What?" Jennifer apologized for her honesty, and Reed realized he needed to hear this, but wondered if Jen thought he was the one who had distanced himself from Sue, Ben, and Johnny. Jennifer asks if the Fantastic Four broke up years ago, and Reed replies that they didn't break up. But Ben and Alicia went to Mars to work, while Johnny joined the Avengers to help track down Anarchists on Titan or Europa, one of the largest colonies on the moon. Reed continues his explanation that Sue is on one of her archaeological trips, which is her hobby. According to Reed, this helps her cope with her grief. Jennifer asked how long it had been since he last saw Sue. At that moment, Reed seemed to have difficulty answering, but Jennifer replied that he hadn't seen Sue in almost a year. Jennifer had checked the Baydocking logbook, and the last time Susan's radio call came in was a month ago. Reed replied that they hadn't fought or broken up, but they were just following their own paths. However, Reed then fell silent and realized that Jennifer was right. It seemed that they were indeed growing apart. He didn't know why, but perhaps it was because Doom had disappeared, and there was nothing for them to face. It seemed that all this time, they had been united by external conflicts. Jen thought this was nonsense. She believed they just needed to talk, especially Reed. Because aside from the delivery shuttle, she was the only one who had come to see Reed in the past 3 months. And for her, this isolation was unhealthy. Reed promised to change, but he had a meeting with the Earth Congress, so their meeting had to end. Reed starts pressing the communication bracelet on his wrist, even though Jennifer still wants to talk. Reed explains that the ceasefire he agreed to with the Galactic Parliament will be reviewed in a few years. Reed leaves Jennifer, adding that he still has a lot to do before the second phase of the quarantine period, which is to help humanity adapt to being part of the galactic community. Besides that, his research is also nearing completion. In Pluto space, at that moment, Johnny was attacking Bentley Whitman, also known as Wizard, when he telepathically warned Thor to be careful, because Enchantress was about to attack him. Thor, who was still facing Claw, threw Claw at Enchantress behind him, while thanking Johnny because this woman had wanted to skin him alive for a long time. Johnny continued to attack Wizard while commenting that he had several ex-girlfriends who were similar. Johnny then turned his gaze to the battle between Iron Man and Red Ghost, also known as Ivan Kragoff, with his super monkeys. He found this scene strange. Johnny telepathically calls Tony and asks if he heard him, and Tony says yes and tells Johnny he doesn't need to think out loud because telepathic nodes don't require volume. Tony asks what's going on. Johnny explains that when they detected villains breaching the quarantine zone, they thought the enemy was trying to escape the Sol system, and Tony agrees and adds that the enemy ship then broke down. Johnny confirmed this and began to explain that he could only survive in his plasma form in space, so he always checked his peg multiple times before leaving the airlock. Johnny continued his explanation that all these villains were using PEGs, but none of them were lit up, which meant they were inactive, and Johnny found this strange. Silver Surfer, who was attacking an enemy, added that they were getting closer to the quarantine field generator in this sector. Hearing this, Tony realized that this was their destination. He said that they should sabotage the enemy's plan, then Tony flew in the opposite direction and said that it seemed he was able to generate enough thrust to change the direction of the ship. But before Tony could finish speaking, he was attacked by Wizard and Red Ghost until he was destroyed. Aisha, also known as Captain Marvel, shouted Tony's name. While nearby, Vision reminded Aisha that Tony Stark's organic body had died several years ago, and that his consciousness would soon transfer to another host. Johnny replied that they weren't so lucky, so they'd better finish this quickly. Johnny then faced Claw again, but suddenly Claw melted, and Thor, who was hitting Wizard, who also melted in front of him, said that this didn't seem to be caused by the Human Torch's fire powers. In addition, Vision also found that the enemy in front of him was starting to turn into liquid. Johnny asked why the enemy was turning into Jello, and at that moment Tony returned with another Iron Man armor. Tony says he thinks he wasn't gone too long, and it turns out Nick Fury and his cavalry are about to arrive as Tony enters a new host on the S.H.I.E.L.D. ship. Tony asks what he missed. Nick Fury is seen flying towards the other Avengers with his troops, while Aisha replies that this is just another ploy by the Anarchists. Nick argued that it must be more than that because they had prepared too many things. Nick was sure that this wasn't just a protest by villains who were bored because of their long lives. Nick was still curious as to why they were targeting the QFG satellite. Johnny commented that this satellite was installed with the agreement of Earth and the Galactic Parliament. He asked what they could possibly gain by sabotaging the satellite. Vision then explains that the quarantine shield interferes with unofficial transmission carrier waves and prevents anything from entering or leaving hyperspace in the Sol system, but Silver Surfer replies that even so, they can still get in by other means. Johnny responded that this was indeed possible, but they could still be detected, while Nick was confused about what they might be missing because they still had to conduct a detailed investigation in this area. At that moment, Fury's men reported that they had to postpone it because Charon Base had just contacted them for help as they were under attack. But unbeknownst to them, the liquid resulting from the villain's transformation appeared to be entering the QFG satellite on Mars. Ben appeared to jump and attack someone while shouting, "It's clobberin' time!" A boy who had covered himself with an energy field flew up and agreed, then hit Ben while saying, "But it's you who'll be getting clobbered, old man." Ben didn't seem happy about being called old man. At that moment, another boy was seen moving quickly around Ben, while Ben struggled to catch the boy who could fly and threatened him when he could get him. The boy who was running fast told Daniel to look closely to see that he was done, and it appeared that the boy named Jacob was moving quickly to tie a red rope around Ben's legs. Daniel complained that Jacob's actions were very sneaky. At that moment, Gorgon shouted, "Agon's jeans!" when he saw Ben fall in front of him. Behind Gorgon were two other Inhumans, Medusa and Karnak. Ben untangled the rope around his leg and told the two boys that their guests had arrived and told them to help their mother. The two boys high-fived each other, shouting happily that they had won, while Ben told them to enjoy this victory, because next time, he would get them. At that moment, a little girl said to Ben, "Yancey too, Daddy." Ben pretends to widen his eyes and asks why Yancey isn't sleeping at night. Then Ben pretends to go after Yancey. However, Yancey is scared and screams with her sonic powers, causing Ben to fall. As Yancey runs to her brothers who have entered the house, Ben tells his 3 guests that Yancey is not Black Bolt, but they should give her time. Karnak admired the way Ben trained his children to be soldiers and covered up his intentions with playful interaction, and Ben replied that his children would not become fighters and that it wasn't training, but just children's play. At that moment, Alicia came and said that the game had made the children too excited to sleep, but Ben argued that he hadn't started it. They had ganged up on him. Alicia simply agreed with Ben. Medusa then thanked Alicia for inviting them to her beautiful home, and Alicia replied that dinner would be ready in 10 minutes and invited them inside. Alicia told Gorgon that she had prepared an extra portion of his favorite pie and hoped that Gorgon was hungry. Karnak replied that he was always hungry, while Medusa praised Grimm's beautiful house and said he felt at home on Mars. Ben agreed that his life was indeed beautiful. Medusa again praised Alicia's terraforming program because its artistic sensitivity was closely related to controlling environmental variables, and Ben replied that Alicia loved her work. Medusa then asked if Ben enjoyed being a stay-at-home dad, and Ben replied that he liked being a stay-at-home dad because he liked being with his children. Medusa asks again if Ben doesn't miss his days as a member of the Fantastic Four, but Ben says he doesn't miss his adventures. Medusa understands that what he misses are his friends. They haven't visited Mars in a long time, and according to Ben, they haven't been here in several years because things have been difficult. Ben appears to transform into human form, and Medusa insists that she doesn't mean to pry into his problems. Ben didn't mind, he did have a wonderful life, but he felt awkward around Reed and Sue because they used to have perfect families too, but then their families disappeared. Medusa understood that Ben felt guilty for having what his friends had lost, and Ben agreed, saying he was also afraid that his happiness would be taken away someday. On Earth, in the Atlantic Ocean. Susan appears to be diving in the ocean and finds a large rock with inscriptions carved into it at the bottom of the sea. Then someone calls Susan's name and she realizes it is Namor. Namor said he felt hurt because Susan came to his kingdom without visiting him. But Susan admitted she didn't want to disturb Namor because he had royal affairs to attend to, and Susan was only here for her archaeological research. Namor thought it was just rotten stuff, then asked if Reed had ignored her, so she chose to move the trash. Susan replied that Namor never understood Reed and how much she loved him, then told him to leave if he only wanted to insult her. Namor said that a lifetime of obedience had made him insensitive, and he offered his help as an apology. Susan asked him to take her to the most historic place in his kingdom, Earth space. Jennifer was still on Reed's ship and told him to rest while Reed promised he would. Then Jen asked when he would do it because he kept making excuses. At that moment, Reed's robot said, "Wingfoot base comlink established." Reed apologized to Jen because he had to bring this up since Wyatt had a mine in the asteroid belt, so transmission was a bit difficult. Reed stretched his body toward the screen, while Jen insisted that she should already be on Earth for her business, but they needed to talk. Reed replied that they could talk later. As soon as the images of the 2 people appeared on the screen, Reed greeted them by name, Wyatt and Thundra, and asked how they were doing. Wyatt replied that they were fine, and he also thanked Reed for the new bore head because it was 30% more efficient than the previous one. Wyatt informed Reed that they had discovered other exotic materials that Reed could mine, and Reed agreed. He then asked about the next transit experiment. Wyatt informed him that the circuit Reed had sent had just arrived and would be installed for the next scheduled window. Wyatt asked if Reed had heard about the anarchist activity under Pluto because they seemed to be intent on sabotaging the quarantine satellite, and Reed replied that this was to be expected. They needed time to accept the changes of the past few decades so that the organic could keep up with the technology. Thundra explained that if the sabotage went beyond vandalism, then it must have been coordinated. In her opinion, the Natural Order was the most logical suspect because they rejected all the conveniences that technology had to offer. Reed argued that the Natural Order is not an organization, but rather a scattered group of believers who reject technology, especially the Methuselah treatment, because they want to accept their natural lifespan. Some even consider Doctor Strange their leader and say they have no evil plans. At that moment, Jen was seen leaving Reed there, while Reed added that he believed Doctor Strange was a good man and would not do anything harmful. At that moment, on a snowy mountain, the elders climbed up to meet Dr. Strange. She told the old man in front of the large crystal that she had meditated according to his instructions, but her anxiety had not gone away, and she asked if there was no other way. The man in front of the crystal turned out to be an elderly Stephen Strange, while the one wearing the Sorcerer Supreme robe was his daughter. Stephen replied that there was no other way, and that their actions were already written in history. Inside the crystal, Stephen saw Reed's Fantastic Four spacecraft floating in outer space around Earth. At the World Congress Tower, New York. Iron Man, who is in the building, looks outside and says that every time he returns to Earth, it becomes more beautiful and there are no traces of the mutant war left. Meanwhile, Bruce Banner, also known as Hulk, who is beside him, reminds him that Iron Man said he couldn't stay here long, but Tony replies that the Avengers are facing a problem in Charon, so he needs to return there as soon as possible. Banner explains that Reed isn't answering his comlink, perhaps because he's in the middle of a critical research phase. He thinks Reed has become more secretive lately, but the other team members are already here. After that, they meet Peter, Hank, T'Challa, and Steve. Hank admits that this is the first time Tony has allowed them to ignore official channels, so he is sure this is important, and T'Challa's hologram adds that a few moments ago, there was an anarchist attack near Pluto. Steve guessed that what Fury hadn't reported to Congress was the anarchists' actions, that this was part of a larger strategy, and that, since Tony was here, he seemed to suspect someone on Earth. Tony replied that Steve knew what Fury was like, that this was still just a hunch, but worth considering. Steve said that it had been a long time since he and Tony had taken action, and Tony replied that Cap still had the instinct for it, and that Fury just wanted him to always be alert. Hank is confused as to why they need to be vigilant since they mostly attend congressional meetings or stay in the lab, and there hasn't been any crime on Earth for decades. Peter agrees, adding that the villains have moved to the border colonies. Tony says that with the solar system as a hiding place, the villains are harder to track, and they may have even returned here. But Tony is sure they remember that villains do sneaky things like this. At that moment, a voice asked, "Got a problem with villains? Then call Spider-Kid." It turned out to be Peter Parker's child, and another child continued Spider-Kid's words by introducing themselves. "Beetle Boy and the Wasp, we're the Bug Squad." Seeing them arrive, Tony laughed at their name, the Bug Squad. Then Peter advised them not to do this now, but Spider-Kid said they were ready for action. Iron Man then apologized because he couldn't stay to see this, even though he thought his other friends would definitely like it. Then, as Iron Man left, his voice disappeared. Spider-Kid asked his father if Iron Man was going on a mission, and Peter explained that Iron Man's mind was already far away from here, while his host Shell would return to the warehouse on autopilot. The Wasp said that it was very unfair because they never got to experience the excitement that their parents did back in the day, because now the world was peaceful, and life had become boring. Hearing this, Peter, Banner, T'Challa, and Steve fell silent and looked at each other. In Charon. An explosion is seen at Charon, then Ascaris reports to the High Evolutionary that Reactor 14 has exploded while 3 other reactors are also experiencing an increase. At that moment, the High Evolutionary is defeating an opponent. He replies to Ascaris that they are fighting to break even with their opponents and that he is sending word to reinforcements, but their situation is not good. At that moment, a report came in that Avengers 1 had responded to the request from Charon Base and would arrive in 3 minutes. The High Evolutionary commented that their arrival was very timely. He informed them that the identity and number of attackers were unknown and that enemy aircraft were attacking near the southern hydrothermal vent. Moments later, the Avengers aircraft was seen flying towards Charon headquarters. Inside, the voice of a superhero responded to the High Evolutionary's transmission, saying they were on their way. Tony's voice could also be heard laughing and saying, "Bug Squad." As soon as Tony regained consciousness in his host inside the Avengers aircraft, Johnny said that his arrival was timely because they were already close to Charon Base. Nearby, Vision explained to Tony that this base was on the moon Pluto. The High Evolutionary had built the base there, using terraforming on Pluto to prepare the planet as a forward post for the second stage of quarantine. Hearing this, Tony grew angry and told Vision he already knew that. Did Vision think his consciousness transfer was flawed? Vision replied that when Tony had reactivated, they had heard him laugh and say, "Bug Squad." Tony said that earlier the kids were playing superheroes and it was funny, while Johnny thought Tony should have been there, and Tony agreed. Vision even thought he should perform a neural diagnosis on Tony. When they arrived at their destination, Norrin said he couldn't show them the situation there because an ion storm was blocking their sensors, and Johnny agreed and told Norrin to use autopilot while they descended to high altitude. Johnny told the Avengers that they would use the Delta formation and told Thor and Vision to get ready in position. They got off the ship while Johnny asked if Tony had met Reed while on Earth, but Tony said no, because Reed had become a hermit. But according to him, Earth had now become a real utopia. Seeing the foggy conditions, Aisha asked if it was smog or a fog screen, then Vision decided that he would check ahead first. Johnny stopped Vision because the radiation could still hurt him even in an intangible form, and the fog could be flammable, so Johnny asked if Thor could get rid of it. Thor spun his hammer to create a tornado that cleared the fog, saying that even though the fog was thin and in a strange place, everything in the sky would bow to him. Once the fog cleared, Thor was shocked to see hundreds of Ultrons there, while Tony was surprised because they had destroyed Ultron decades ago. So who created these? Johnny replied that the person must want Utopia to fail. On Earth. Susan dived with Namor, who showed her the remains of a great kingdom at the bottom of the sea that had collapsed. Susan asked why this dream utopia could be destroyed when, judging by the beauty of its architecture, they were at the peak of their glory. Namor replied that it could be due to earthquakes, epidemics, famine, or war, but to him it didn't matter. Susan saw the statues there and thought that they were people forgotten by history. She wondered what they could learn from this place. Namor replied that there was nothing they could learn because they had failed. According to Namor, if Susan could breathe underwater like him, she would smell death and decay here. Namor then kicked a nearby pillar and said that even scavenger fish wouldn't come to this place because it was no place for living creatures. Susan wanted to protest because Namor kicked a part of the temple that had survived for a millennium, but she suddenly said it was interesting. Namor asked what it was, and Susan pointed out that there was a hidden map behind the altar stone. When she saw the map, she said it was Kree. On the other hand, Ben, in his human form, was showing his children a historical hologram, while the narration explained that the Kree came to Earth in prehistoric times to collect specimens for their experiments. Daniel looked at the hologram around him and said how cool it was, while Ben explained that according to the museum, it was called a full sensory hologram, where everything was based on actual video recordings. The hologram story explains that the victims of the Kree then evolved into a superior race called the Inhumans after undergoing millennia of evolution, but they are still being analyzed and controlled by the Kree. At that moment, Daniel asks who recorded them, and Ben replies that it was the Kree Sentry. Jacob comments that it looks powerful, and Ben agrees. At that moment, the hologram shows the Kree Sentry standing among the Inhumans. The narration continues explaining that the Inhumans did not want to be enslaved by the Kree, but then a voice outside the hologram says that there is a foul smell, while a friend of the creature says that an animal is dirtying the holo display. The creature's presence caused the hologram to stop, and Jacob protested because the fight was about to begin, while Ben told the three aliens behind him to leave. But the third alien continued, saying that he didn't know if it was the stench of humans or their children. Ben then told his son to go find their mother, while the second alien said he was a man who was a woman's henchman, and the third alien added that he was a nanny. He then told Ben to follow his son before they disappeared, but Ben replied that they would be fine. Ben turned into the Thing and said he didn't want his children to see what was about to happen. Seeing the Thing, the three of them were terrified. The first alien called him Sire Thing. The second alien said he didn't know it was the Thing, while the third alien added that he thought Ben was human. Ben retorted, "What do you mean, thought I was? I am a human." At that moment, Ben looked at the aliens on the lower floor and realized that this place was filled with aliens. Ben muttered that he used to be human, then told the aliens to leave and reminded them not to oppress others who might not be as forgiving as he was. Soon after, Ben walked away, grumbling that he used to be a monster on Earth until he was finally able to transform into his human form. But now that he was on Mars, they wanted to see the thing. He said that this was ironic. At the Parliament for Galactic Unity, an alien gave a speech explaining to a group of other creatures that Rigelian scientists had also recorded the same sensor echoing throughout the galaxy, that these sensor fluctuations were so small that they were almost undetectable, even by the most sensitive instruments. At this point, a Skrull interrupts and says that all the council members agree that the Rigelians are the most knowledgeable when it comes to unexplained and indistinguishable matters, and he asks them to move on to another case. The meeting leaders said that this was important, but the Skrull replied that there were more important human problems. At that moment, a Kree interrupted, saying that there were no human problems here because it was just the Skrull's paranoid thoughts. The Skrull then replied that this was the result of genetic intervention by the Kree. Otherwise, how could they explain the evolution that had occurred in human technology? The Kree replied that their intervention only occurred with the Inhumans. He then showed a hologram of Reed Richards and explained that Reed was responsible for the development of human technology. He also added that Reed was here to discuss the quarantine protocol, but the Skrull knew that Richards was the one who stopped their attempt to take over Earth. Finally, an agreement was reached because the threat from Earth had diminished after the extinction of the mutant race, and the quarantine protocol would be obeyed as long as the quarantine shell continued to envelop the solar system. The Skrulls left with looks of hatred on their faces. On Charon, Johnny, who was slaughtering Ultrons, felt that this was too easy. Even Thor destroyed many Ultrons in one swipe, and he felt that the robot's power was weakening. Vision, who was punching 2 Ultrons, explained that the molecular resonance of these Ultrons was not the same as the Ultrons they knew before, and the inside of their bodies did not show structural density, while Tony replied that these were fake Ultrons. Johnny felt this was familiar, and even Aisha felt a sense of déjà vu. At that moment, all the Ultrons turned into liquid, and seeing this, Thor asked if someone was playing a joke on them. Tony dismissed the thought, saying that the Bug Squad was funny, but this was really annoying. Suddenly, Silver Surfer tells the Avengers to look at the space they left a moment ago, and they see that the sun is shining brightly. Silver Surfer continues by saying that the quarantine satellite has evaporated. Vision said that the light from the explosion would take time to reach where they were. According to him, Ultron melted when the satellite exploded, and this incident was a diversion from the actual battle. At that moment, the High Evolutionary arrived and asked who would use such destruction as a diversion, and Tony replied that it was the Anarchists. According to the High Evolutionary, they were just bored criminals committing vandalism, but Johnny retorted that this was the reason for the antisocial behavior since the solar quarantine began, and that this attack seemed to be part of a larger plan. Tony replied that Fury was right after all. Unexpectedly, a hologram of Nick Fury appeared from behind Iron Man's armor. Nick said he didn't want to say he was right, but he said the SHIELD arc had just left the satellite 20 minutes ago, and it seemed that their situation was now the same. Aisha replied that they didn't know anything. Then Nick explained that the SHIELD technology had taken a sample of the villain's liquid and their lab had exploded because the liquid was a sentient explosive. Nick was sure that the liquid had entered the satellite and detonated something vital. Aisha concluded that the attack on Charon was just a diversion while the liquid did its job, which she thought was very evil, while Johnny argued that they could find out who did this if they knew why he did it. He also asked what had been achieved in this incident. Johnny explained that the excess disruption field would compensate for the destroyed satellite after the incident was detected, and Tony confirmed this, but there would be a delay long enough for a transmission. Fury confirmed Tony's words, showing the results of the communications team's discovery of a transmission from outside the Sol system that penetrated the quarantine field towards Mars. At that moment on Mars, the thing was hitting a rock while saying, "Volembolis." He hit another rock and said, "Shelda Kalbird de BMs." Then he destroyed another rock while grumbling, "PCKNN LTL KDS." At that moment, Alicia's voice behind him said that the person must have offended him, but Ben argued that he just wanted to try carving but didn't have Alicia's skills. Ben said it was nothing. Then Alicia admitted she was grateful for Ben's sacrifice of moving to Mars so that Alicia could participate in the terraforming process. But according to Ben, it was not a sacrifice because his life was perfect, but he didn't know why, even though he always wanted to be human and no longer be the Thing. A moment later, Alicia kissed him and said that Ben was indeed the Thing, and that she accepted him. Alicia then left and told Ben to stay in his Thing form because they were going on a picnic and she wanted Ben to bring their canoe, grill, and icebox. Hearing this, Ben replied, "Life is good." Back to the bottom of the ocean. Susan said this was a Kree city built on top of the ruins of an older building, and the minerals here were foreign to Earth and even to their universe. Susan was very happy to have found this place. Namor then asked her to leave, but Susan refused because she wanted to study this place further. Susan was seen taking pictures of what was in front of her, while Namor said that this place was uncomfortable for him because the black chimney made the water here hot and toxic. Susan said she could stay here alone and told Namor to go somewhere else. But Namor replied that he didn't remember Susan being interested in archaeology before. Susan moved to another spot and explained that her children's nanny, Agatha Harkness, had made her children love archaeology. And after Agatha died, Susan was able to get close to her children through this. At that moment, Namor remembered Franklin and Valeria, which he considered a great tragedy. Susan closed her eyes and said that sometimes it was hard for her to say their names, but they would always be in her thoughts. Namor apologized because he didn't mean to hurt Susan, but Susan's search for these ancient objects seemed to be more than just a casual interest. Susan felt that Namor was right and that she should have been more honest with him. At that moment, a voice said that Namor couldn't hide from Atuma's army behind this chimney. Then a group of fishmen riding giant fish appeared, and their arrival destroyed the buildings around Namor and Susan, throwing them both away. In space, Saturn. Johnny appears to be flying across Saturn, sitting on a surfboard with Silver Surfer. Johnny says that the communication shield only knows the direction of the signal, and Fury assumes that the signal is from the Kree because the Inhumans are on Mars, but the Inhumans are not loyal to the Kree. Quite the opposite, in fact. Noreen, also known as Silver Surfer, believes Johnny is right. Fury chose Johnny to go to Mars because his relationship with the Inhuman royal family would allow him to learn their secret customs. However, Johnny cannot count on that, because if he could, he would still be with Crystal. But Ben is there with Alicia and their children, so he can help. Johnny hopes they get there before something happens, so he tells the Surfer to go even faster. Silver Surfer replies that nothing is faster than him. Then Johnny apologizes because space is indeed very vast, which is why the Anarchists managed to make them run around like this. Johnny remembers that the last time he met Reed, he said he would make intercolony travel faster, but that was 3 or 4 years ago. He feels he should have kept in touch with Reed and hopes Reed is doing well. Meanwhile, in Reed's lab, his robot reports transit potential variable 0.92, modulation circuits harmonized. Reed, who is still tinkering with the device in front of him, says that it's amazing. He tells the robot to align the buffer and fill the secondary booster, then the robot can prepare for investigation with full active analysis, because they will be ready for testing. Unbeknownst to Reed, Jennifer, also known as She-Hulk, was still spying on Reed's activities and smiled suspiciously when Reed said he was going to conduct a test. Behind Jennifer was another creature spying on Reed, who turned out to be Uatu. At that moment, the Watcher Oira reminded Uatu to maintain his spectral aspect. Then Uatu asked if Oira was here on the Council's orders. Oira replied that he was reminding Uatu of his promise not to interfere, but Uatu responded that this was a crisis situation. Oira retorted that it was a consequence for the entire galaxy. Uatu asked what would happen if all of humanity were to be wiped out, and Oira answered that he would just have to watch it happen. In Tibet, Stephen and his daughter appear to be floating in the air. He guides his daughter by saying, "There is no individuality. We are all one with each other and all things. Patterns of shifting consistency in the fabric of being. There is no distance, no time. They are constructs of our limited physical senses. Ignore them. All reality is illusion." Dr. Strange's daughter replied that she was trying to do so, but Stephen said that she didn't need to try, she just had to do it. Then their surroundings became a white vortex, and Strange's daughter apologized for failing. However, according to Steven, there was no failure or success, because both were illusions. Steven said that Clea's attention was distracted because she was too worried about the challenges Steven had to face. Clea asked if Steven really had to face them, and Steven replied that emotions blinded her to the truth. At that moment, the situation around them looked like a changing and absurd reality. Clea explains that her fear stems from her love for her father, a love that makes her happy, and she will not let it go. Steven says that Clea can have true truth and power if she eliminates her emotions and considers them useless illusions, but Clea finds this hard to believe because, for her, nothing is more valuable than love. Dr. Strange asks if she would sacrifice everything for love, and Clea says yes. Dr. Strange then asks if she would sacrifice everything for the love between a child and her parents, and again, Clea says yes. Dr. Strange asks again, what if Clea has children later? Clea is about to answer confidently, but then she realizes the meaning of her father's question, and she apologizes for doubting her father's wisdom. At that moment, the atmosphere around them returns to the room where they are. At the mid-Atlantic ridge, Namor was seen stuffing the mouth of the giant fish that the fish soldiers were riding with a rock. He then told Susan to leave while Namor himself was fighting the human fish army. Susan commented that Namor's Atlantis knowledge of courage was outdated. Susan then pointed her hand at the fish soldiers and made them gather together. Then she threw them to the bottom of the sea. Behind Susan, the giant fish is seen about to eat her, but Susan turns to face the fish and directs her power at it, causing it to be thrown back and crash into the ruins of a building there. Susan explains that when the blue-colored barbarian army attacks them, they must be prepared to treat themselves and their pets. Namor finally admitted that the courage he had seen in Susan before had returned, and Susan thanked Namor and reminded him that she was married. At that moment, one of Namor's men came and reported to Namor that they had been sent here to capture these barbarians after their attack on Atlantis. But Namor thought that Attuma seemed to prefer to restart their ancient war. Namor invites Susan to Atlantis because she won't be safe out there alone. Namor says he means well, but Susan says she knows Namor means well, but she is no longer the helpless girl Namor kidnapped years ago because her force field and her ability to control it have improved. Susan then creates a space without water, where air can enter. She takes off her helmet and explains that she can now create an atmosphere where air can enter from within the water or reduce gravity so that they remain floating. Susan adds that she no longer needs to be invisible to protect herself. Susan then kisses Namor on the cheek and thanks him for being a good friend. Susan then puts her helmet back on, becomes invisible, and enters her ship. At that moment, Namor looked like he was going to stop Susan, but the pressure from the force field released by Susan threw him back. And seeing this, Namor's crew asked if he was okay. Namor said he was just surprised by the fall of the force field. They watched Susan's ship leave, and Namor's crew asked why Susan wanted to go into such a terrible place. Namor replied that he wished he knew. On Mars, Ben, in the form of the Thing, appears to be relaxing on the beach with his family. Ben says that this is paradise. He doesn't even know anything about terraforming, but he thinks Alicia is amazing. Meanwhile, Johnny, in his human form, has just arrived with Norrin. He agrees with Ben's opinion. Ben looks surprised by their arrival, while Johnny explains that they were passing by and decided to visit them. Ben hugs Johnny and asks how he is doing. Johnny says he feels better than he did a minute ago because of Ben's hug. Ben asks how long it has been since they last met, but Johnny asks what month it is instead. Ben also asks what year it is. Ben thinks Johnny looks good and asks if there is a problem. And Johnny replies that everything is fine because he is just stopping by. A moment later, Alicia approaches Johnny with her children, and Johnny, seeing her, comments that Alicia looks amazing. Alicia thanked him for the compliment, and Johnny commented on how big the children had grown. Johnny crouched down to get closer to Yancey, saying it was lucky that the children had their mother's looks. He introduced himself to Yancey, but Yancey hit Johnny in the face with the ice cream in her hand, causing Johnny to fall into their food box. Ben commented that it looked like their party would have to be canceled. He then told his two sons that it was time to use the leftover food for a food fight, and they both ran towards the pile of food. Jacob quickly circled Johnny while throwing food, and Daniel grabbed several cream pies and aimed them at Johnny. At that moment, Alicia tried to stop the children, but Ben said it was just a joke and Johnny liked it. Ben then continued that Johnny used to laugh at him and this was his revenge. In the El Tirini Nebula. On a ship, representatives from the Shi'ar met with representatives from the Kree and Lord Ronan. The Kree representative said that the Rigelians were eager to show their data, and the Shi'ar representative replied that they were just petty creatures. He added that the worm wanted him to support them against the Skrulls at the next meeting. The man showed holographic data and explained that their records of this galaxy-level disturbance were quite random, and when added to the Shi'ar's analysis, a pattern would emerge. The Kree representative also showed his hologram data, convinced that it would help confirm their suspicions. Upon seeing all the data displayed, the Kree representative concluded that it was a shockwave that affected all parts of the galaxy, and he asked Lord Ronan what caused it. Lord Ronan said they could only speculate about the cause, but that the shockwave originated from Earth, and then Lord Ronan pointed to the hologram of Earth there. In space. Reed, in his lab, received information from Wyatt that the Herald signal had been received. Reed announced that the HRB probe was about to enter the gate while Reed's robot began to enter the gate room. Reed inserted the last key and said that the transit arc was open and stable, while Wyatt confirmed the arc and that all signs were green. After that, Reed said that the Terminator had been passed and the telemetry feed was offline. At that moment, the HRB robot in the machine was illuminated by an orange light while Reed continued his calculations, but communication with Wyatt was suddenly cut off. On a ship called Wingfoot Mining, Reed was heard calling Wyatt, but there was no response. Then Wyatt's voice was heard informing them that they were fine. Their communication was cut off due to the overload from the arrival earlier. Reed asked about the condition of the HRB, and Wyatt replied that the HRB had not been saved. Meanwhile, Thundra was seen spraying the burning HRB in front of her. Wyatt reports that there is residual radioactivity in the HRB and that the core temperature has reached 1,700 degrees with zero magnetic field and no damage from the impact. Hearing this, Reed tells him to send the report and then cuts off their communication. Reed then mutters that this should have worked, even punching the console in front of him in frustration, confused about what he missed. Meanwhile, on Mars, Johnny, wearing his Fantastic Four suit, asks again if there are any other clothes he can wear while waiting for his clothes to be washed, and Ben replies that this will keep him out of trouble. Johnny is confused by what he means, so Ben explains that the Inhumans around them always wear masks. Johnny replies that he has never noticed, but it seems to be true, while Ben explains that this is compensation for their faces looking too human. Johnny asks if that means Inhumans don't like human faces, and Ben explains that it's more complicated than that. But since moving to Mars, he has realized that the rules here go back to the fundamentals and the Fantastic Four are still respected here, so he will be safe. As they approached the kingdom, Ben asked what Johnny needed here, but Johnny told Ben to guess, and Ben said Johnny had distanced himself from the royal family after separating from Crystal, but Ben and Alicia were still on good terms with Crystal. Johnny said that someone had sent a signal from outside the solar system to Mars, and Ben understood that Fury suspected the Inhumans of collaborating with the Kree. Johnny trusts the royal family, and Ben knows that this is the military way of thinking. Johnny then asks if there have been any suspicious incidents lately, and Ben replies that nothing has happened except for Johnny's arrival. At that moment, Crystal appears and greets Johnny, and Johnny notices that Crystal is wearing a new mask, to which Crystal replies that it is just a formality. Johnny comments that she looks sexy, and Crystal changes the subject by asking why Johnny is here. Johnny asks if Crystal isn't happy to see him, and Crystal replies that she would be happy if Johnny came to see her, but she knows that's not the case, because Johnny's arrival coincides with the royal family facing a crisis. It appears that a group of Inhumans are holding a meeting inside the room. Crystal explains that planetary security has detected an unknown energy surge in a remote desert area in the south, located hundreds of meters away from the worker colony. Johnny opines that the energy level appears to be large and growing. Medusa says that Black Bolt asks what Johnny knows about this, and Johnny replies that he knows nothing, but that they must check it out immediately and be prepared for anything. At the galactic core. Uatu was behind Galactus and asked if he was allowed to approach. Then Galactus replied that he had already broken through this far, but Uatu replied that it was for a good cause. According to Galactus, Uatu had once again broken his promise not to interfere in the affairs of primitive species, and Uatu replied that those primitive species had defeated Galactus before, and when they were about to take his life, they spared him. Galactus warned Uatu not to test his patience, but Uatu stated that the test was whether Galactus deserved that forgiveness or not. Uatu then leaves the place while Galactus sits silently. In Wakanda, Africa, T'Challa looks at the group of animals in front of him and tells his son that this place was once almost dead, but the future has given T'Chaka's generation a chance. T'Chaka replies that he will try to be worthy of this position. T'Challa admitted that T'Chaka made him proud, but his friends were waiting for him for his inauguration party. He reminded T'Chaka not to party too hard because their hunting trip would begin the next morning. At that moment, the communication bracelet on T'Challa's wrist glowed. He received a call from Reed and asked if he was okay, and Reed replied that he was fine and asked about the data he had transmitted earlier. T'Challa was surprised that Reed was still working. He then invited Reed to come to his son's inauguration, but Reed couldn't come because of this experiment, and he needed T'Challa's analysis data. T'Challa replied that he and his best people had already seen the data and concluded that the calculations and theories there were far beyond their capabilities. T'Challa believed that by joining this party, Reed would get new ideas. Reed replied that he had tried everything and it was frustrating. At that moment, someone came and T'Challa told Reed that this person wanted to talk to him, but suddenly their connection was lost. T'Challa informed Reed that he had disconnected and T'Challa was unable to reconnect with him. Apparently, he told Jennifer that Reed seemed to want to be alone. Jennifer, aka She-Hulk, replied that Reed was obsessed with his work, so much so that she couldn't talk to him before she left, and now she hoped Reed was okay. Where Reed was, he said it was impossible for 3,700 comm channels to be damaged at the same time. He ordered the computer to perform a CCS diagnosis and for HRBS to directly check each power coupling. At that moment, Jennifer appeared and felt that Reed needed to relax. Seeing Jennifer, he thought that Jen had returned to Earth. Jen said she couldn't leave Reed and was glad to still be there, but Reed replied that Jen only saw him losing control. Jen reminded Reed that he was only human. Reed asked what that psychiatric diagnosis was, and Jen replied that she was there as his friend and Reed had to trust her. At the Mid-Atlantic Hydrothermal Ridge, Susan orders the computer to lower the temperature inside the ship, but the computer can't do it because it prioritizes maintaining life, while the temperature outside the ship is 670 degrees and rising. Susan hopes she can do this as quickly as possible. She then approaches the ruins in front of her and confirms that the symbols are the same as the runes in the book by Agatha that she is carrying. She intends to translate the symbols, but suddenly there is an earthquake warning. Susan saw that there was an open channel directly below them, so she ordered the computer to save them from there. But the computer said that the water flow exceeded the propulsion capacity. At that moment, Susan looked shocked as they were sucked into the hole. Susan ordered the computer to jettison the load and take them up, but the computer couldn't do it because the heat of the place had eliminated the ship's control capabilities. Susan decided to just follow the current, but then the hull of the ship hit rocks protruding from the seabed, and Susan was thrown inside the ship. The ship continued to fall uncontrollably in the hot water vortex, and the computer continued to issue collision warnings. On Mars, the Inhumans, along with Ben, Norrin, and Johnny, went to their destination on Mars. A dust storm covered the area, and Medusa asked Crystal to clear the dust from their path, but Crystal couldn't because it wasn't a natural phenomenon. Triton confirmed Crystal's words, saying that their target was in the center of the storm and they were scanning their vehicle. Johnny replied that it wasn't scanning but a weapon lock, and he told Medusa to flip the vehicle over. Once the vehicle was upside down and they had fallen, Johnny told the Silver Surfer that he would save Ben, then shouted, "Flame on!" Johnny pulled Ben up and said that Ben had gained weight, but luckily he hadn't eaten all the pie during yesterday's picnic. Ben replied that Johnny wouldn't be laughing when he found out who shot them down, and it turned out to be a Kree sentry that had been hidden here centuries ago. Ben admitted that Fury was right. Kree Sentry walked forward with his right hand emitting energy, saying, "Directive Delta 9, maintain optimum stealth." Johnny approached and said that he represented Earth's security, while the Sentry's presence was a violation of the Galactic Quarantine Protocol. However, the Sentry continued to say, "Obscure activity, eliminate all witnesses." Then an attack came from his hand, aimed at Johnny and his friends. Kree Sentry was attacking with its laser beams while Johnny flew overhead and directed Silver Surfer, Black Bolt, and Crystal to follow him in attacking Kree Sentry together. Johnny told them to attack without holding back because Kree Sentry wasn't very smart, but they were strong and adaptable. However, the Sentry manages to sweep all four of them away with his fire-emitting hands, and Ben argues that the Sentry can adapt to their powers, but he can't withstand their physical strength. Ben then hurls a large rock at the Sentry. The Sentry quickly strikes back at Ben, who is shocked that it can get up so quickly. Johnny then tells Medusa to help Ben, while he directs the others to attack the Sentry immediately before it can repair itself. Johnny attacked Sentry's head with fire while Crystal attacked the other side with lightning from her hands. She warned Johnny not to get too close to Sentry, while Gorgon warned his cousin not to get too close to Sentry either. Gorgon then kicked Sentry in the back to test his resistance, while Karnak jumped and said he didn't feel any structural weakness in Sentry. However, Triton hit Sentry behind the knee and replied that they could just dismantle him. Meanwhile, Medusa, who helped Ben with her hair, asked if he was hurt, and Ben said he was fine, but Ben warned that there was a weapon behind the dust storm. Their gaze shifted to a weapon in the dust storm. At FF Asteroid. Jennifer entered the transit gateway as Reed explained, saying that this gateway was the entrance to the negative zone, which was like hyperspace but different. Reed agreed with Jen, adding that there was a dimensional interface between that zone and where they were, and it could be considered a crossroads between infinity. Reed approached the control panel and explained, "The temporal variance is almost zero, and it isn't affected by the immense gravitational fluxes that plague hyperspace or wormhole travel." Jen interpreted this to mean they could travel long distances with less energy. Reed added that this could be done indefinitely on two routes. Then Jen asked if they could go anywhere in the universe, and Reed replied that someday they would. But there were still some bugs he had to work out. Jennifer asked what kind of bugs these were, if they couldn't be fixed. And Reed explained that he believed they could be fixed, but it would take time to explain it to Jen. Jen replied that she had time and wanted to help, but Reed was confused as to why she had to be there when she had her own job. Jen approached Reed and said that anyone could do her job, but Reed's work here needed help, and she could help him. However, Reed refused because he always worked alone, but Jen argued that Reed used to work with Sue and she could do the menial work that Sue used to do. Reed refused again because for him, Sue didn't just do menial work, but also gave him input and inspiration. Reed fell silent and added that he was stupid for pushing them apart. Reed left, muttering that he had to fix his relationship with Sue, but Jen suddenly hit Reed until he was unconscious and said it was too late for that because Reed's sentimental nature had made him useless. At that moment, Reed dreamed of returning to the scene of Valeria and Franklin's deaths when Sue's voice was heard begging Victor to let them go because they were just children. Then Franklin was seen jumping to attack Victor even though Reed behind him had told him to lower his power, while Valeria was seen extending her finger as if to draw a rune symbol like the one Sue saw in Agatha's book. In the ocean, Sue opened her eyes and realized that water was dripping on her body. She was confused as to how the submersible could be leaking, but it turned out that the ship's viewport had broken and there was no seawater around her. Sue was sure she wasn't on the surface because she remembered being sucked to the bottom of the sea when she fainted. Sue looked outside and realized she was below the seabed, seemingly in a volcanic chamber that had temporarily cooled due to the influx of icy seawater that had dragged her in. Sue took off her clothes to change into new ones and decided to leave immediately. Sue read the translation of Agatha's book, which mentioned a city under the sea, but she did not expect that the city was at the bottom of the ocean. After this, Sue would search for the city mentioned in the book without the help of a computer or submersible. A moment later, Sue moved into the force field and said that from now on, she would be alone. On Mars, Johnny and Norrin moved closer to the weapon that was ready to fire, while Crystal, who was helping to make a hole in the storm for them to pass through, said that she couldn't block it any further. John responded that this was enough because they only needed to get close to destroy the weapon. But when they got there, the device had already fired a beam, so John stopped, and Norrin realized that this was not a weapon. Norrin saw that a wormhole had formed under the orbit of Deimos, and someone was trying to pass through the quarantine shield. Meanwhile, Black Bolt signaled Medusa, then Medusa gave orders on Black Bolt's behalf for them to stop fighting and take cover. But when they all went to take cover, Sentry prepared for a new strategy. Black Bolt then attacked Sentry with his sonic powers, causing Sentry to try to put up sonic protection, but unexpectedly, Black Bolt's attack grew stronger, causing Sentry to say that his system was damaged. Before long, Sentry was thrown by the force of Black Bolt's sonic power and crashed into the tower, causing Sentry to explode along with the tower. At this moment, the Inhumans and other superheroes were hiding behind a rock held by Ben when the explosion occurred. They said that the tower had been destroyed, after which they asked about Black Bolt's condition. Medusa replied that Black Bolt was fine and apologized for the damage caused by his attack. Johnny responded that he did what he had to do to stop the invasion, but Norrin informed them that an enemy aircraft had entered the wormhole a few milliseconds before the tower was destroyed. It appears that an aircraft has successfully entered the solar system at this moment. At Neptune's ring, a ship is seen in Neptune's rings among the rocks, while Diablo inside the ship informs that the ship has successfully entered and they are just waiting for their reward. Mad Thinker, who is in front of a large crystal, replies that they still have other tasks to do. Diablo asks about the Kree who hired them both to get through the quarantine field, and Thinker says they do need his genius. Diablo replies that they also need his alchemical inventions. Thinker asks what he means, then Diablo mentions that Thinker communicates with the Kree as their agent. Thinker replies that the quarantine field cannot hinder his intelligence. Diablo acknowledged Thinker's intelligence but said he didn't have psychic abilities, so how could he communicate with them? Thinker said he would find out later, but for now he needed his doppelganger fluid because they were going to destroy the shield ship. At that moment, the shield ship appeared in the crystal in front of Thinker, deep in the bottom of the Atlantic. Sue was seen descending with a force field bubble surrounding her and found a machine surrounded by lava and fire. Sue found that this machine was large and still functioning, so she concluded that someone or something was maintaining this machine. At that moment, a giant creature tried to hit Sue, but she managed to dodge it. Sue realized that this creature was guarding the area and that there was more than one creature there. Sue then removed the bubble surrounding her and moved to avoid the attack while thinking about how they could move so fast even though they were giant sea creatures. Sue moved even lower, intending to find a narrow tunnel to hide in, but then she discovered a group of moloids carrying spears among the tunnels. Sue was finally cornered by the moloids surrounding her and the giant creature chasing her. At that moment, she heard someone asking where her three other friends were. He couldn't believe Sue happened to be here just as he was about to win. Sue found Mole Man in front of her. She thought Mole Man was dead, but Mole Man explained that that was exactly what he wanted. They believed him while he made a grand plan to kill everyone on the surface of the Earth. On Mars, the Silver Surfer was seen moving with his surfboard while the Inhuman aircraft followed behind him. Johnny explained that the Surfer was using the tidal forces in the cosmic ether to pull them along with him so they could close the distance with the enemy before they reached Earth. Inside the ship, Johnny praised Medusa's ability to pilot the ship and keep up with the Surfer's movements, and Medusa replied that she was trying. Crystal, who was in front of the screen, found that there was no response from their various communication frequencies, so it was possible that the ship was blocking their signals. Ben felt that they had to try to contact Earth's defense forces because they knew nothing about this attack, so he told Crystal to contact Reed's asteroid headquarters. Crystal replied that it was the first place she had contacted. Johnny approached the console where Crystal was and asked if Ben remembered when the Frightful Four isolated the Baxter building in a blackout field and Reed used hyperwaves to enter the building's security system. Ben remembered and told John to do it. Johnny said he had already done so and now the system was searching for Reed, but what he saw made him exclaim, "Uh-oh!" At that moment, Reed, who had just regained consciousness, found himself in a transparent box holding his body, while Jen in front of him said she had been waiting for Reed to wake up so he would know that Super Skrull had defeated him. Jennifer's face then changed into that of Super Skrull. Reed seemed dismissive, saying that the Super Skrull was just a poor imitation of the Fantastic Four, and that the last thing he heard was that his stupidity had gotten him exiled. The Skrull made his arms long and glowing, saying that he knew Reed was trying to make him angry to defeat him, but he had learned to control his emotions and that his success, this time, would restore his position as the king's favorite among the Skrulls. Reed replied that he would not let the Skrull earn the king's favor, and the Skrull agreed, but said that his transit gate technology would help him. The Skrull recalled that when the quarantine field covered the solar system, his king became curious about the technology Reed was secretly developing, so he left his home planet for Earth. After that, he lived in a dead life pod and entered the quarantine shell among the star debris. He then disguised himself as a human and figured out how to enter Reed's asteroid. Once inside the asteroid, he disguised himself as an unknown HRB and waited for an opportunity until Jennifer came to the asteroid. He then disguised himself as Jen and heard the secret of the gate from Reed. Now the Skrull changed his appearance to resemble Reed, saying that by using Reed's appearance, he would present this technology to his king, and all he had to do now was get rid of Reed. The Skrull then threw the box containing Reed into the transit gate. Inside the box, Reed tried to find an opening. He said his only chance would be when the box hit the distortion zone and there would be an opening for him to move. Sure enough, Reed found a small opening to get his hand out and grab the Skrull to get him into the transit machine. The Skrull asked Reed to let him go, but Reed ignored him. He said that if the Skrull wanted to know the secret of the gate, he had to come with him to the negative zone. They entered the negative zone together. Seeing what happened to Reed, Johnny told Ben that they had to help him, and Ben replied that he had thought they were facing the Kree, but now the Skrulls were also involved, and with the quarantine in place, they shouldn't be here. Ben then slammed his hand on the console in the ship, asking what was wrong with Reed, but Johnny told him to calm down and not damage the equipment. Ben apologized because this was the first time he had faced a problem since Doom's death, especially since he had left Alicia and his children alone. Johnny hugged Ben and said that they would solve this, like his orange friend used to say. "It ain't over till we're done," Ben thanked Johnny. Meanwhile, Karnak concluded that the ship they were following was approaching the Fantastic Four's asteroid, and judging by its direction, it looked like it was going to land on the right side of Axis Bay. Medusa replied that they still had 15 minutes before they got there. Ben asked if John could show him the visuals inside the ship and find out if it was Kree, and Johnny tried and found that inside the ship there were some Kree, namely Ronan and his troops, as well as Shi'ar royal guards. Inside the ship, Ronan said that the power to control the universe would be in their hands, so they had to defeat all who opposed them. Then the troops were seen moving to attack the asteroid. In the negative zone, Reed released his grip on the Skrull, and the Skrull begged Reed not to let go and pleaded for his help. Reed taunted him, saying that he was Super Skrull, so he didn't need Reed's help, and that Reed couldn't even save himself before he was free. At that moment, a bat-like creature flew towards Reed and broke the box that was holding him. Reed says he would be grateful if this were a normal situation, but he knows this creature has no brain, yet its attack could alert others to its presence. Reed kicked the Batman who attacked him, and the Skrull flew away with his body engulfed in flames. Reed intended to leave immediately by pushing himself off a piece of land before anyone else noticed him, but suddenly he was attacked from behind and fell to the ground. It turned out that his attacker was Annihilus, who said that Reed's presence here was not a coincidence, but part of his plan. Deep beneath the Earth's surface. Mole Man takes Sue into a building at the center of the lava flow, telling her that this is the citadel of the Elder Gods, a temple that was submerged to hide the orb of Nomen. Mole Man's followers have been pumping lava out of this cave for 2 decades, but Mole Man is convinced that Sue already knows this, which is why she came when Mole Man was about to succeed. Sue rejects Mole Man's accusations, but Mole Man doesn't believe her. He feels that the Fantastic Four want to stop him from obtaining the orb, which he will use to destroy human life on the surface. Sue actually feels sorry for destroying all the amazing machines here, but Mole Man has evil plans, so she must stop him. Mole Man orders his men to capture Sue, but Sue jumps up so that they collide with each other. She then dodges an attack from a giant monster and runs towards the lava lake, while Mole Man tells her to surrender because otherwise she will fall into the lava lake. Sue replies that she needs to move more aerodynamically because her destination is indeed this lake. Sue jumps into the lava lake and uses a force field bubble to keep her afloat, adding that her purpose here is to find the orb. Mole Man forbids her from entering the lava because even silicon men cannot withstand the heat, but Sue replies that this will be a first for her, but Mole Man has restored her confidence. Sue then submerges half of her bubble into the lava, and Mole Man shouts that she will die there. Sue remembered when Valeria cast the rune when she died, telling Mole Man that she had been searching for traces of the orb for a long time, but it was only after Mole Man mentioned the name orb that she fully believed again. And that was all she needed. Sue then submerged the force field bubble completely into the lava, even though sweat was pouring from her temples due to the heat. Meanwhile, on the Fantastic Four asteroid. The Great Accuser asked Macron if the cosmic distortion did indeed originate from this place, and Macron, who showed the shockwave ripples, replied that the distortion would come from here. He said that the galactic shockwave was traveling back to coordinates near here, and according to the law of cause and effect, the ripples would return to their cause. Ronan admitted that he was not interested in theory but power. The Praetor reminded him that the center of power would be divided between the Shi'ar and the Kree. And Ronan agreed, but told them to stay here so that no one would interfere with their mission while Ronan went inside with his troops. Suddenly, Spider-Man's web hit Ronan's eye. Spider-Man said it was too late for that because they had arrived early at another part of the asteroid when they realized their communication network was down. Then Captain America added that their presence here was a violation of the quarantine treaty, so they had to leave. Ronan replied that he was the living embodiment of the law and there was only one punishment for those who challenged him, namely death. So he ordered his men to kill the Avengers nearby. The transit gate glowed pink, then Johnny and Ben entered the lab by teleporting with a large dog named Lockjaw. Johnny said Lockjaw was exhausted from the long-distance teleportation and the speed he had to generate, while Ben opened a box and took 2 blue backpacks from it. Ben argued that they should stay away from the fight in the docking bay, but Johnny seemed hesitant. Ben said that he wasn't a coward, but he was worried about his children and Alicia, and their priority right now was to get Reed back. The 2 of them then entered the transit gateway with Ben carrying one of the blue backpacks in his hand. At that moment, Johnny said he agreed, but Ben hadn't considered his strategy. A moment later, they both arrived in the negative zone, and Ben asked what that clever term was that Johnny had learned while leading the Avengers. Johnny transformed into the Human Torch, reminding Ben that the negative zone was a vast and confusing alternate universe. So how could they find Reed? Ben replied that he had known Reed since college and that he had annoying habits, such as always closing his toothpaste tube. He was a man of habits and never made the same mistake twice. So, since he always worked near the negative zone, Johnny replied that Reed must be wearing a homing device. Ben agreed and took out a device to track Reed's whereabouts on Neptune's ring. Diablo asked Mad Thinker how to contact Kree when the quarantine field blocked all transit and communication, from radio signals to hyperwaves. Did he use pigeons to send messages? The Thinker said that Diablo had finally considered using low-tech methods, but Diablo was confused about what that meant. The Thinker replied that he was using Morse code with a flashlight. Diablo seemed flustered and surprised by the use of Morse code, but according to the Thinker, it was genius. Diablo asks if his android invention is included in Thinker's low-tech genius, forcing him to use his unique alchemy invention. Then a voice replies that Diablo's chemical invention is indeed unique. At that moment, Vision appears behind them both from his invisible form. Vision explains that the remnants of his attack on Charon provided a single wavelength profile that they obtained when performing a spectrographic sensor sweep. Diablo clawed at Vision, who disappeared to avoid the attack, but Diablo would not let Vision live to tell the Avengers about his discovery. However, Vision said he didn't need to tell them because they were already here. At that moment, Iron Man and Thor tore open the hull of the ship, while Aisha was seen flying behind them. Thinker admitted he was ready for this and sent out his mandroids to face them, while Vision told him to think again because the fuselage was now torn, and the outer space atmosphere had been created by Captain Marvel aka Aisha's power. So Thinker would not want his concentration to be distracted. Moreover, Vision had released their PEG when he appeared earlier, in Tibet. It was nighttime and Stephen Strange woke his daughter from her sleep and said that the time for thinking and preparing was over. Susan was seen floating in front of them carrying the orb. Susan asked Clea if she was surprised to see her back, and Clea replied that she was surprised that Susan had managed to bring her here. Susan admitted that she was very motivated. Clea's hand emitted a beam of light, and she intended to heal the wounds on Susan's body, but Susan refused because she thought it could wait. Susan then asked if Clea still wanted to stop her. Clea replied that she had been thinking about the case since they last met, and with her father's guidance, she realized that she was wrong to judge Susan. Susan asked if Stephen had changed his opinion, and Stephen replied that he didn't judge anyone. He also reminded Susan of the danger of the power she would unleash after this. Susan asked if Stephen would help her, and Stephen asked if Susan would use the orb herself if he refused, regardless of the consequences. Susan replied confidently, yes, in the negative zone. On a ship, Annihilus tells Richards that he will see something only known to his most loyal servant, and at that moment, Annihilus's subordinate arrives and reports another intruder. Annihilus thought it was another member of the Fantastic Four, but it turned out to be Super Skrull. Skrull said he was tricked by Richards into coming here and that he wanted to work with Annihilus to kill humans. But Annihilus said he liked obedient servants, so he ordered his men to take Skrull to the mine. The Skrull tried to beg for mercy, but Annihilus ignored him. He told Richards that with his desire to fight for freedom, Richards had made many enemies. Richards replied that every philosophy has its own enemies. Annihilus asked Reed if he thought he was superior for trying to cut corners in his world, and Reed wondered how he knew about this. Annihilus laughed heartily upon hearing this, and Reed finally understood that the failure of his transit experiment and the unexplained variables were Annihilus's doing, and Annihilus confirmed this. He destroyed Reed's experiment because he knew Reed would definitely try to fix it. So, from every experiment he sabotaged, his scientists would learn every security secret of Reed's that prevented him from accessing Reed's gateway. Annihilus was seen shooting down the HRB that Reed had sent as a previous gateway test. Annihilus said that a yawn antenna had been installed where their dimensions met, so it was only a matter of time before synchronization occurred. Then Annihilus would enlarge the small gap into a large door so his army could enter Reed's universe and conquer what lay ahead of them. Annihilus continues by saying that he is Annihilus and he will conquer all creatures in his hands and no one will be able to stop his domination. But at that moment, Ben descends and knocks Annihilus down, saying that they have heard these words many times before. Reed looks surprised by Ben's arrival, then Johnny also appears and attacks Annihilus's forces, making Reed question how Johnny could also be here. Ben threw a parachute backpack at Reed and told him to save his questions because right now they just wanted to save him. He told Reed to put on the backpack and leave immediately, but Reed said they couldn't leave before destroying the yawn antenna that Annihilus had pointed out. Reed then told Johnny to destroy the yawn antenna while he would help Ben. But Ben, who was fighting Annihilus, took the antenna's power source from Annihilus's hand and hit him, saying that Annihilus wouldn't be able to start the machine without his cosmic battery. He immediately asked Reed to leave because there was a problem at home. Reed, who was helping Ben fight Annihilus's troops, guessed that the problem there wasn't as big as the one he had created here. At that moment, Johnny was seen burning the yawn antenna while Ben agreed with Reed. Reed admitted that what he did earlier was stupid, and Ben agreed, but he felt that he should always support Reed. At that moment, Johnny returned to them and said that they could do this another time. He then invited them to leave, and finally, the three of them flew out of Annihilus' ship while Reed asked what was happening at home. Meanwhile, on the FF asteroid, Captain America and his fellow heroes were fighting against Ronan's army and Praetor. At that moment, T'Challa asked why they were fighting, and Jennifer replied that the most important thing now was to survive. Ronan used his hammer to attack Jennifer, saying that her death was inevitable, but Captain America blocked the attack with his shield and replied that death would not come so easily. Daredevil kicks Ronan from behind, adding that the fight will get harder because he feels the air pressure changing with the rotation of the airlock. He is also sure that help is coming because he hears a special sound from the cosmic air surf. Sure enough, Silver Surfer arrived and attacked the enemy together with the Inhuman royal family. At that moment, Reed, Ben, and Johnny came out of the transit gateway. Reed said that as far as he knew, Super Skrull worked alone, so he didn't know why Ronan was here. But Johnny told Reed to look at the security monitor because he wanted to check on Lockjaw first. While checking on Lockjaw, Johnny found that the animal was sleeping like a baby. And Ben, who was checking the monitor on the asteroid, commented that if Johnny gave Crystal half the attention he gave his dog, she would definitely want to stay his girlfriend. Johnny confidently said that Crystal still wanted him. When he saw what was happening on the monitor, Ben said that a world war was happening in the docking bay, so they should go there immediately. At that moment, Reed asked for a moment because he wanted to make sure Annihilus couldn't follow them here, while Ben, who saw what Reed was doing, found that he was activating the automatic destruction program. Reed explained that even though it was inactive, there was a link between this gate and the gate where Wyatt and Annihilus could use that path to invade their dimension. Reed then pressed the button to activate the program, and the gate would be destroyed within an hour, while Ben reported that Johnny had destroyed the Yan antenna earlier. Reed was worried that Annihilus had other machines, so the risk was too great. Reed thought that his arrogance had caused too many problems. Suddenly, a figure teleported to the location, and Johnny wanted Reed to stop thinking about it because someone had arrived. At that moment, Stephen arrived with Susan and Clea. Seeing Susan's arrival, Reed looked very happy and was about to greet her, but Susan instead attacked Ben, Reed, and Johnny by imprisoning them in a force field. Reed and Johnny were confused as to why Susan did this, but Susan simply told them not to try to fight back because it would be easy for her to destroy them by simply shrinking the force field around the room or removing the air inside it. Ben told Susan that this wasn't funny, and Reed even questioned whether she was really Susan. Johnny also asked why Susan was doing this. Susan replied that it was because they didn't have much time left and she wanted them all to follow her every word. Meanwhile, outside Pluto, inside the S.H.I.E.L.D. Ark, Nick said he would use thumb screws if necessary, but neither Diablo nor Mad Thinker knew anything. Iron Man added that they only knew that Earth was going to be attacked. Nick felt that they couldn't get there in time if that was really the case. Then Iron Man explained that the transmission blackout was indeed happening, and even his consciousness transfer was blocked. Aisha felt that they should have gone directly to Earth from Neptune, but Nick rejected the idea because he wanted them all to be here. As far as he knew, the Kree had ordered Earth to be destroyed, which meant they didn't want humans in this sector, and that was why they had to stay here. At that moment, Nick's subordinate reports that someone has entered the quarantine shield, which has been hijacked from somewhere far away. Hearing this, Nick orders his subordinate Contessa to show it on the main screen. Upon seeing the main screen, Nick feels that at least they know what they are up against. It appears that warships from all over the Kree and Shi'ar are breaking through the quarantine shield. On Earth, Sue says that Valeria and Franklin aren't dead, but Reed insists that they saw them die. Sue explains that they are only missing, and everyone assumes that they both died, but in fact Sue and Reed saved Valeria and Franklin by pulling them both into the future. Or at least they must have done so. According to Reed, they are currently in a major crisis because the asteroid is under attack, but Sue says this can't wait because the occult alignment has already occurred here and now. Hearing the term occult alignment, Reed reminded them that Stephen did indeed have psychic abilities, but he often exaggerated things. Even so, all of his abilities could be explained by science, and changing the past was scientifically impossible. So whatever Strange promised was definitely wrong. Clea tries to explain to Reed that they had tried to stop his wife, but Steven interrupts his daughter, and Sue says that it wasn't Steven who told her what to do, but Valeria. Sue had already told Reed that when Doom captured Valeria, Valeria looked at Sue and drew a symbol in the air, and she had told Reed this before. Reed replied that he remembered that, but at the time it was very confusing, and they were all in shock, but Sue said that Reed never believed her. She then showed him the orb of the gnomon, and the runes visible here were the same as those drawn by Valeria. Seeing this, Reed apologized and said that these were just a collection of shapes so Sue could see whatever she wanted here. Sue also showed Agatha's book and pointed out that the symbols were similar, while Johnny commented, "That's all hocus-pocus witch stuff." According to Sue, the book explained how to manipulate time, so they could take Franklin and Valeria right before they were supposed to die and bring them to the present. According to Sue, this would not cause a temporal paradox. Sue continues her explanation that Valeria always knows things they can't explain, but before Sue can finish, Reed interrupts her, saying they've discussed this before, but now there's an attack here that could start a war. Sue replies that she doesn't care because she cares more about their children. Then Reed says he understands Sue, but it's impossible for them to change time. At that moment, Sue begged Reed to forget about his logic and accept that there were things beyond his knowledge. Sue shed tears and admitted that she knew this sounded crazy, but she had been searching for the stone for 20 years with this mindset. She had always hoped to encounter a dead end that would prove that what she had been doing all this time was foolish, but the stone was now here, and it was real. Sue opened a force field that trapped Reed, Ben, and Johnny, while begging Reed to try to believe this for Franklin and Valeria's sake. This time, Reed didn't need to understand it. He just had to believe. Reed put his hand on Sue's and said he would try, then Johnny put his hand there too, followed by Ben. They decided to do this together. Meanwhile, inside the asteroid, a battle was raging between the Shi'ar and Ronan's forces against the Avengers and the Inhuman royal family. Ronan began to ask for the help that was supposed to come to their aid, but his men replied that no help had arrived yet. He suspected that the reinforcements were facing obstacles. At the same time, Aisha was attacking a warship that had entered the quarantine shield. According to her, thanks to Fury's suspicions, more Avengers members had come here, but it wasn't enough to face this warship. Iron Man gave the order to target the large ship with guerrilla attacks and remain within the enemy's defense range because they wouldn't be able to leave when there was an attack. That was all they could do for those on Earth. Meanwhile, on the asteroid, Steven began to read a spell with his daughter behind him, providing assistance. Time flows, time curves. Time is but a wrinkle curled in infinity. Future and past mere folds in a single now. Below them, both had become burning lava. Then Steven continued his spell. In the place the souls who were are again. Let their will rend the illusion of then and now. Let what once was be again. Sue had started crying and felt that this would work, while Reed tried to tell Sue to calm down, but she insisted that this would work. At that moment, Reed seemed to see the shadows of Franklin and Valeria, and he was very surprised. Sure enough, in front of them, they saw Franklin trying to save Valeria. Seeing this, Sue called out Franklin and Valeria's names, while Reed tried to hold Sue back as she was about to rush forward, because Steven told them to stay where they were. Steven ordered his daughter to hold her back quickly, because the angry force was moving without restraint, and since death was near, he had to prevent it from happening, until the deadly energy could disappear without causing harm and return to the limbo of infinity. At that moment, an explosion occurred on Doom, Franklin, and Valeria, while the battle on the asteroid and the space battle between the enemy forces and the Avengers were still ongoing, and several bright lights like stars disappeared into the limbo of infinity. Back with Doom, he was surprised that his powers had disappeared. Franklin experienced the same thing, but he said he still had a lot of power left. Hearing this, Valeria forbade Franklin from fighting again, but suddenly someone jumped in to take Valeria from Doom's grasp. At that moment, Doom was surprised at how Richards could heal himself. Reed returns his 2 children to Sue, saying it will take several years for him to recover, but he has decades to do so. However, Doom rejects Reed's explanation, feeling that this is one of the sorcerer's illusions, but Ben lifts Doom from behind and says that this is not an illusion, but that Doom is in the future. Ben informed them that the war had long ended and they would not let Doom ruin everything. At that moment, Reed forbade Ben from hurting Doom because they did not need to fight, while Doom refused to surrender, striking Ben hard. Then Johnny arrived and attacked Doom with fire, saying they only wanted to give him a chance to make peace. But Doom replied that he didn't care about peace. He was born to rule, and anyone who stood in his way would die. In outer space, Iron Man, who was attacking the enemy, said that these Sentry robots weren't as tough as the previous supersized models, but they were everywhere. Vision, who was also attacking with lasers, reported that the enemy was trying to gather the Avengers back to the Shield Arc and get them into the Planet Blaster's line of fire. Vision felt that the Sentry's attack pattern wasn't random, but that they were being directed. At that moment, the Planet Blaster appears to be lit up and ready to fire. Fury tells those fighting outside to save themselves because the Shield Arc has no propulsion system. Then suddenly, Contessa detects a large increase in energy outside the fleet. Unexpectedly, a massive attack hit the Planet Blaster that was about to attack the Shield Arc. And seeing this, Thor looked shocked, and Iron Man also felt that this was more terrifying than before. Then Galactus appeared in front of the Shield Arc, telling the attacking ship to leave. Henceforth, any who threaten this solar system shall make an enemy of Galactus. Go now. Meanwhile, Reed, who avoided Victor's attack, told him to look out the window and accept that they were in the future. But Victor still thought this was only Reed's future. Did Reed think he had won and Victor had lost? Victor's one hand attacked Johnny with a fire attack while his other hand hit Ben. Ben argued that this was not about victory, but the fact that Victor was already worn out while they were still new and stronger than before. Ben then grabs Victor's attacking hand, but Doom uses his other hand to hit Ben, though the blow hits the floor instead. Victor admits that he is indeed stronger than Victor, but he is always afraid to be cruel. Reed shouts for them to look at the floor, and they see that the ship's floor is torn from Victor's earlier blow, causing Ben and Victor to fall. Reed extends his body to help Ben and Victor, telling Victor to act wisely because they don't need to fight like this. But Victor uses his hand to push Reed's face away, saying he doesn't want to be part of Reed's world because it's a world for the weak, while he is Doom. Moments later, Ben kicks Doom until he falls, calling him a cruel mad dog. As Reed was about to approach Doom, Johnny told him to stay put because he would face Doom, while Doom prepared his attack and told Johnny to come and meet his death. Johnny said that he had been holding back because he could burn through his force field and armor, but Doom still said he would kill him. As he was about to attack Doom, Reed stopped him because behind Doom was a conduit that channeled power to the negative zone gate. Doom looked behind him and guessed that the gate was a dimensional gate created by Reed, which was the source of most of Reed's technology, while Reed tried to stop Doom and said that he had started an automatic destruction program. But before he could finish speaking, Doom attacked him. He believed that Reed's fear had betrayed him, so he rushed towards the gate and intended to take control of Reed's power. Reed tried to stop him, but Doom had already entered the gate, and the effects of the automatic destruction caused energy to escape and attack Reed. Ben urges Reed to leave, but Reed intends to stop the automatic destruction because Doom's entry has caused the program to crash. However, the countdown has already reached 0, and Ben tells him it's too late. Ben pulls Reed out, and at that moment, the gate becomes a vortex that sucks in everything around it. Meanwhile, in outer space near Pluto, Galactus and the Shield Arc saw the warship leave through a hole, abandoning the place. Nick felt this would be the end of their quarantine period, and since the Shi'ar and Kree attacked without the support of the Galactic Council, Earth would not face sanctions. Vision felt it wouldn't make their new allies happy either. Thor agreed, although he wondered why the ancient creature would help them. Aisha replied that perhaps he liked them, while Tony said only as hors d'oeuvres. Nick added that the reason didn't matter as long as they and humanity survived, so they would have the opportunity to do something useful. At that moment, Uatu appeared behind them and smiled as he listened to their conversation. Back on the asteroid. Reed said that the gate had disappeared and Doom was trapped in the negative zone. Then Ben said that Reed had done what he could. At that moment, Crystal's voice was heard calling Johnny. Johnny said that he had wanted to help in the docking bay, but his attention had been diverted. Johnny then asked if the fight was over. Gorgon, who forced the door open, replied that Ronan and his men left when no help came. While Johnny explained to Crystal that Lockjaw was fine, he was just groggy from waking up. Crystal said she knew Johnny would take care of Lockjaw and she was just worried about Johnny. Then Johnny replied, "You were." A moment later, Reed asked if they were okay because it seemed like there had been a big commotion earlier. She-Hulk agreed, saying it had been a long time since she had fought like that, while Cap replied that it had been decades ago. Spider-Man added that he had never been in a fight like that before, but Hank Pym forbade him from telling the kids because they would protest if they knew they were on an adventure. Reed then apologized for dragging them into this mess, and Jennifer, also known as She-Hulk, suggested they talk another time because she needed a bath and a long sleep. But Ben told Jen to wait because he definitely wanted to see what they had found. At that moment, Susan arrived with her 2 children. They ran towards Reed and called out to their father. Reed turned around and hugged Franklin and Valeria while crying. He thanked Sue and apologized to her. Sue, who was also crying, forgave him and said that everything was in the past and that they had a future together. Seeing this, Jen asked why Reed didn't say that this was what he was fighting for, and Reed replied that this was all Sue and Steven's fight. He thanked Steven and apologized for what he had said. Steven said that words would disappear in the face of truth, while Valeria reminded Steven to destroy the orb so that it would not fall into the wrong hands. Steven acknowledged that Valeria was very wise, and Valeria also thanked Steven for pulling her and Franklin through time. Reed asked if Valeria knew she was in the future, and Valeria said yes because it was the only way to help her. She also told him what she had seen with Franklin. Franklin replied that was why they both joined the fight, because Reed would surely die otherwise, but they knew they would be okay. Valeria explains that her vision is mixed with her dreams about the future, but she knows that this is how it will end. Reed is confused by Valeria's use of the word end, but Valeria says that it is the end of the crisis and danger, so now they can be a complete family again. Franklin comments that the Fantastic Four are now 6 people because the 2 of them have proven their abilities. At that moment, Johnny whispered to Ben that the Fantastic Four would become 9 people. Once Daniel, Jacob, and Yancey heard this, Ben patted his head and said that he knew this utopia was too beautiful to be true. Meanwhile, the asteroid continued to travel towards the sun with Valeria's voice saying that there would not only be 9 people, but 16 people in the Fantastic Four after Johnny and Crystal had their 7 children. Meanwhile, in the negative zone, on Annihilus' ship, cheers could be heard as people called out Doom's name. It turned out that Doom had killed Annihilus, and now all of Annihilus' followers, along with the Super Skrulls, supported Doom's rule. And that's how their long, complicated journey finally comes to an end. Not with a triumphant victory, but with choices, losses, and moments that redefine what family truly means. Stories like this hit differently because they remind us that even the strongest heroes can fracture, heal, and grow in unexpected ways. Sometimes the most powerful battles aren't fought in space or across dimensions, but inside the people we've followed for decades. Now I want to hear from you. Which part of this future hit you the hardest? And do you think this is a fair ending for them? Or does their legacy deserve something completely different? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I always love reading your takes. Thanks for watching Panelix, and as always, have a nice day.